Alright, so this tutorial is for the week 1 assignment in Web Publishing 1 Spring Semester 2012. What we're going to do is I'll kind of walk you through the basics of creating a web page. All of this material is covered in the textbook starting way back page 1 and ending up on page 42. So there's some very preliminary stuff in the beginning that everybody should see, and then as you go through it, you'll see each of the steps that we deal with in this video tutorial are covered, and probably in more detail. So you might get a better explanation of why we're doing some of these things in the textbook. Here you're probably going to see the how, maybe not as much of the detail behind it. So both reading the textbook and watching this video are important. So I'm going to do this for Mac users because at this point I can't demo it on a PC. The process is identical except for setting up the text editor. On a PC you're probably going to use Notepad. That's the equivalent of what we're going to be using on the Mac. But on the Mac we have to change some preferences to start with, and on the PC you probably don't have to deal with this. So you get to skip a step. So before we get started, what you see now, I'm in Blackboard. I've clicked on the assignments link at the left, and I'm looking at the week 1 assignment. So you'll see the instructions, read in the textbook, and watch the tutorial, and then here are the things that you should include in your final web page. You notice it's set up sort of like a checklist, so when you're finished, go back over this and check off to make sure that you've done each of these things. These are the items that you're going to get points for having tried. As I said in class, if you try it and for some reason it doesn't work, no problem. I just want to make sure that you try each of these things. So you're going to put your name in. We're going to actually set it up in a particular way that you'll see in the demo. List things that are of interest to you, make an unordered list, make an ordered list, so on and so forth. So we'll cover that in the demo. But again, use this as a checklist before you send me the file. And then you'll send me the file. Name it your last name -week1.html. So in other words, I would name it Wasco-week1.html. Then you're going to attach it to a Blackboard message and send it, and at the end of this tutorial, or possibly in a separate one, I'll demo how to attach an item to a Blackboard message. Very simple. You could probably do it without any tutorial. So let's get rolling. On the Mac, we're going to use the built-in text editor that's on every Mac, and it's called, not surprisingly, TextEdit. So I'm going to go to the Applications folder, scroll down once it opens up. I have a lot of applications. It takes a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to scroll down to TextEdit. Now you notice below it there's one called Text Wrangler, and that's actually the one we're going to switch to. But let's start with TextEdit because it's very simple and it's a good way to get started. Plus it's on every Mac, so you can always use it no matter what computer you're on. So double click to open it. And you notice when it opens up, you don't see any ruler or any tabs or anything like you might see in Microsoft Word. It's just a plain text box. This is what we want because we want to edit a text file, not what's called a rich text file or an RTF. Now, you will probably have to make a slight change in your own version of TextEdit. So if you go to TextEdit, Preferences, where I am now, be sure that yours is set the way mine is set. Under Format, Wrap to Page should be checked, and Plain Text. So it starts off right out of the box as rich text. We want to use plain text. Everything else you can leave as it is, nothing to worry about. And then click over here on Open and Save. I would check Ignore Rich Text Commands in HTML files. And down here, notice that one of the options we have when saving files is UTF-8. It could be set when you start as automatic, or it could be set as Western. Those would be the two most likely things. If you need to, change it to UTF-8. We'll be talking about this more later. It is discussed in the textbook, but let me just say at this point, for simplicity's sake, for doing web pages, for coding web pages, UTF-8 is the way to go. Alright, so here we have UTF-8, ignore rich text command, under open and save, new document, plain text, wrap to page, and we're good to go. Alright, close it. Now, if you just made those changes, in other words, if yours was set to RTF, you probably are looking at a ruler or tab settings here. In that case, what you need to do is close that document, open a new one, and it's going to open up just like this one, which is the plain text. Okay, so far so good. Alright, now we're going to move on. There's in the textbook there are some things about how to set up Notepad on the PC. A few other things. I'm going to flip over to creating a spot for your website, page 16. Probably good to do this in advance. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to, let me close this because I don't need it anymore, and I'm going to create a new folder on the desktop, and I'm going to call it, let's see if I can move it. Oh boy, let me see. I've got to change my settings here because it's not letting me put a folder where I want to. None. Okay, there we go. Alright, get rid of that. And here I've got an untitled folder. I'm going to call it Wasco Web 1 for the time being, and that's where I'm going to save this file. Now next week we're going to add another folder to this and make it a little more specific, but for now, last name Web 1 probably be all you need. Alright, so I got a place to put it, and in fact let me just do that right now, and I'm going to name this file as it's described in the assignment description. So I'm going to go File, Save As, and it would be your last name, so for me it's Wasco, hyphen, Wk1.html. HTML works also, but we're using HTML just as a convention. I'm going to look here, I'm on the desktop, and I want to put it in that folder I just created that was called Wasco Web 1, so I'm going to click on that. Folder called Wasco Web 1, file name Wasco-Week1 HTML. You notice here we're saving it also, again, UTF-8, so you have another opportunity to change it here. Save. Alright, now you can see there's my file name. We're ready to go. Now we're going to start doing our first HTML page. And that's going to take us to page 24 in the textbook. The first thing that we do in an HTML page is we put what's called a doc type. And we're going to use the two, to do all the tags when we're coding, we're to use the two keys on the bottom of the keyboard, and most people call them less than and greater than symbols. So less than is the way we start, and it's, you know what, let me make that a little bit bigger. There we go. That's a little bit easier to see. Exclamation mark in caps. Oops, in caps. Doc type. And the doc type is HTML. And now we're going to close that tag by using our less than. Doc type tells the browser what sort of code we're giving it so that it knows what it should do with it. So if you're going to ask somebody to translate something, first thing you need to tell them is what language is it in. Sort of what we're doing here. So doc type in a sense is it's not exactly the language it's in, but close enough for what we're talking about now. So let's just call it that way. And doc type HTML, it's all we need. Much simpler than a few years ago when we had a much more complicated doc type. Alright, after you do that, the next thing you do is you put in, and doc type, by the way, is a tag. Most tags have an opening and a closing tag. Doc type is different. There's just a single doc type tag. Next tag we're going to put in there is HTML, and we're using all lowercase. It's a convention left over from XHTML that no longer is absolutely necessary since we're using HTML5, but it's still good practice to use it, so we're going to stick with it. All lowercase, HTML. So now we've got an opening and closing tag, and we're going to put a bunch of stuff in between those, so I'm just going to move that down. So the first tag we put on is HTML, and that's going to be the last one at the very bottom. After HTML, we have to add a little additional piece of information to this tag, and we're going to give it an attribute. And attributes have a name. In this case, the name is lang, which means language, equals en. So what we're saying, we're using HTML. This is what this means. We're using HTML, and the languages page is created in is English. Obviously, in other countries, they would have a different set of letters here for if they're not using English. So HTML, and we're saying the language is English, just so the browser knows what's coming. After, let me get rid of that back. After we put that tag, the next tag, we open that tag, and the next tag is head. And then, just so we don't forget, we're going to close it right there with the closing head tag. And there's a number of things that go inside the head of the document. Again, it's explained probably in more detail in the book. We're just going to put a couple right now, but ultimately there's quite a few things that will end up inside the head of the document. In a simple web page, not so much. The most important one, title. And again, this is a good way to remember to close the tags, is open and close them at the same time. So first do the opening, then do the closing, and then in between, put what you're going to put in between. Now we need a title for the page. The title for this page is going to be, let's make it something that is a little bit meaningful. So let's just say it's going to be Al Wasco's first web page. Title can be anything you want it to be, but it's very important that you use words that actually tell the user what they're looking at. You've probably all seen, when you go to the web, a page that's titled Untitled, which means they never did this little piece. Now, just for the heck of it, I'm going to save this. So I'm just going to do Command S to save it. And I'm going to look at what we have so far in the browser. So if we look inside this folder, this is actually an auto-saved version. I'm going to just get rid of that. This is the one that I just saved. Easiest way on a Mac to open this in the browser is just to drag it down to the dock where the browser icon. You won't see this because it's going to go off the screen, but I'm dragging it to the Firefox icon. Firefox is probably the best browser to use, especially in the early stages of learning web, because it's very standards compliant. So in other words, it does things right. Not true of all browsers. So now we've got something on our web page, but do you see where it is? Alright, if you look here, nothing. That's because what you see here is called the body of the document, and we haven't even created the body in our HTML, let alone put any information in there. But here's the title, Al Wasco's first web page. Oops, Al's Wasco's first web page. That's not so smart. Alright, so we can fix that real easy. Here's the beauty of the web. Make an error, you just go back and change it. Not a problem. So let's go back here. I'm just going to get rid of that. Command S to save it. I'll go over here. So there's my old version. I'm going to hit refresh. Boom. There's my new one. Easy. Alright, so that's what we have so far. The title appears up here in the title bar. It appears if you've got a tab browser, it's going to appear in the tab like that. Okay, let's go back and add a few more things. In the head, we're going to put one other, so we're still inside the head. There's where it starts, there's where it ends. So we're still inside that. I'm going to make the text a little bit smaller so that all fits on one page there. On one line. We're going to put in what's called a meta tag. We'll talk a lot more about meta tags later, but this is the only one that we're going to use for now because, again, it's a pretty important one. It's got an attribute which is named charSet, basically means character set, character setting. And if you remember back when we were working in setting up TextEdit, we made sure that it was in UTF-8. So again, we're telling the browser that the character set we're using is UTF-8. Meta tags don't have a closing tag, so we don't have, like here it says title and then /title, that's the opening tag, that's a closing tag. Meta doesn't have a closing tag, so the way we actually close it is we put a space and the slash, and this is what's called a self-closing tag. So this indicates that's the end of that tag. So let me just split this up a little bit so you can see what we've done. The HTML, which closes down there, the head opens here, title opens, there's the text for the title, title closes. Then we have a meta tag here, meta charSet equals UTF-8, that self closes with the slash, and that's all we're going to do in the head right now. So here's the closing head tag. Okay, so at this point, let me do this. I'm going to set up the next section, which is the part that you see on the web. So all of this information up here goes to the browser. We see this little piece of it in the browser title bar, but everything else is there for the browser's purposes. Somebody looking at the web page doesn't see that. Now, for what we want everybody looking at the web page to see, we have to set up the body because it all appears in the body, everything that's on that web page. So again, open, close, and then in between here we're going to put everything else. So what I'm going to do right now, let me just bring that, I want to get this HTML. As you can see, the spacing of these is kind of arbitrary. The browser doesn't care if you put extra spaces in here. I'm just setting it up so it's easy to read. But as far as the browser is concerned, whether you have it like this or like that makes no difference. The browser ignores these extra lines. Alright, so now we're ready to go. We've told the browser everything it needs to know. We've set up the body so we can put some information in there that's what people will see, and then we've closed the body, and then we've closed the HTML. So here's our web page, and once again, just to show you what we have at this point, I just did a Command S to save that. We'll go back here, we'll refresh it, and once again, nothing here because we set up the body, but we haven't yet put any information into it. So what I'm going to do right now is stop this piece of the tutorial, and then we'll pick up with adding the information into the body in the next part of the tutorial.